Hi everyone, I have a brief tutorial here for you about using adequate paraphrase when you paraphrase from a source. And this should be helpful for you in putting together the rhetorical bibliography as well as the final position paper for this class, because putting things into your own words, as we learned from Project 2, is a really important part of working with sources. And we want to avoid patch writing as much as we possibly can. So we want to talk about here what are some of the best practices for paraphrasing information, when should you summarize, and when should you paraphrase. The best practice for paraphrase is to put the text aside while you write about it so that you are not tempted to copy directly from the source itself, but that you're forced to think of your own words. The English language is a very rich language. There are so many different ways to say the same thing. And if you are genuinely trying to put something into your own words, it's very unlikely you'll be using the same words as the source. So just put it aside, write it in your own words. Paraphrases and summaries still need citations. You always need to cite ideas that aren't your own, even if you put them into your own words. So as we discussed with Project 2, if you're using the exact words from a source, you need quotations and a citation. If you are putting ideas from a source into your own words, either as a paraphrase or as a summary, you don't need quotations, but you still need a citation. This is very important. So I've got a sample here, and I want to look over this together, and let's see if we can determine whether this is adequate paraphrase or not. So the original is this: British physicist Stephen Hawking has been the most prominent skeptic, hypothesizing that any attempt at time travel would lead to a back reaction, a massive buildup of energy that would rip space apart. His theory is called the chronology projection conjecture, since it would make history safe from explorers who might meddle in important events like the crucifixion of Jesus. The best evidence against time travel, according to Hawking's writings, is that we have not been invaded by hordes of tourists from the future. And here's a student's summary of this passage. And see if you can determine whether this is adequate paraphrase, if it's adequately put into the student's own words, or if this would be considered patch writing. Stephen Hawking, the most prominent skeptic, claims that time travel is not possible because the energy it requires would rip space apart. His theory would protect history from time explorers who might change important events like the crucifixion. If you notice, there are some key phrases that are repeated exactly from the original source. Okay, we have this phrase, the most prominent skeptic, right? It appears up here in the original. We also have this phrase, the energy it requires would rip space apart. It's very similar to the idea of up here, energy that would rip space apart. Some of those words are exactly the same. And then there's also this phrase down here about time explorers who might change important events like the crucifixion. This is very close to the original language, the explorers who might meddle in important events like the crucifixion of Jesus. A few different words have been substituted here and there, but generally speaking, this is the same as the original language. So this would be considered patch writing, not adequate paraphrase. Here's another version. This is a student's summary of this passage a little bit differently. Physicist Stephen Hawking rejects the possibility of time travel and argues that the energy it requires would rip space apart. According to his theory, the chronology projection conjecture, we don't have to worry that history will be changed by the interference of time travelers. Hawking says the best argument against time travel is the absence of invaders from the future. So this one is actually a much better rendering of the original. It's actually done pretty well in the student's own words. There's still this phrase here, rip space apart, but the student has actually put that into quotations. And that's a legitimate phrase to quote from because it's an interesting and original kind of phrase. And quoting it here tells us something about the way that Hawking was describing his theory. We also have exact words in terms of the theory itself, and that's legitimate. You can put a theory, the name of a theory, into your text without quotation marks because we understand that it has to be word for word. You'll notice there are a few words that are the same as the original source. We've got invaded, invaders. time travelers. That's okay. We can have a few words that are very similar or the same as the source, but you can see generally this is really put into the student's own words and own sentence structures. The student has really reorganized the sentences as well. Here's another example. Most of the internees who were adults during the internment period are no longer living, and surviving internees who were children at the camps are widely scattered around the country. Families of former internees and local citizens who live near the internment camp sites have formed groups that are working to preserve the oral history and the places that tell the complex internment camp story. And here's the student's version. Since most internees have passed away or are scattered around the country, their family members and the locals who live near the internment campsites are working to preserve the oral history and camps themselves. So you can see this, like the first example I showed you, this one has some significant language from the original. So we have phrases like locals who live near the internment campsites, working to preserve the oral history. So this one is really too close to the original language. This would need to be revised and put a little bit more into the student's own words to avoid patch writing. So again, this is a really important topic. Patch writing is something that you're going to be dealing with probably for the rest of your college career, possibly when you get out of college as well. And it's really important that you know how to put things into your own words and not rely too heavily on the source. If you find that you're really struggling to put something into your own words, then just use the original language and put it into quotes. That's the safest way to make sure you're not stepping over that line into plagiarism.